Out of all the characters in control of our financial destiny, Jerome Powell may be leaving one of the most embattled legacies. Today, we're going to get deep into the Fed and the data it uses in its dual mandate. Welcome to the Between the Lines podcast, your weekly lesson on how to approach an uncertain world with positivity and balance. I'm Nicky P here with my good friends and money brains, Luke Tatum, Rob Brayton from Perfect Spiral Capital. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Doing well.
Doing very well. Thank you.
So we got a fun one today. We're talking about Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve and Trump firing people because he's not getting the data that he wants. And to my heart, it's like, well, at least it's fun that they're admitting the numbers mean nothing. And if you don't like the ones you get, you just find somebody who'll give you the numbers that you want.
I mean, that's been kind of happening for a long time, hasn't it?
Well, they're not usually so brazen about it, I feel like, is the new thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, this time it's pretty blatant, right? At least they're honest about it. But yeah, in the past, it's in different areas. It's certainly been a change over time. You know, inflation, CPI.
Yeah, if there's one thing Trump does not have, it's a filter, right? So he just kind of off the cuff. I mean, you know, we've seen some interesting comments lately about all kinds of things, but
for good or bad, frankly, you know, sometimes I love it about him, sometimes I hate it about him, but so today's article, why don't you give me kind of like the broad strokes for the people out there? What's going on?
Well, I know one of the main articles we were looking at was just kind of the sort of the quandary that Powell has been in as part of the Fed's dual mandate. And for those who are not aware of what that is, the Fed's been given two mandates, and one is to manage interest rates, and the other is to manage unemployment. And those two things, while on the surface seem like pretty straightforward things to manage, do actually cause counterintuitive impacts to one another depending upon how they're used and leveraged. And by managing interest rates, what I meant to say is the inflation, is how well they manage that inflation aspect. So you sort of manage the inflation by leveraging what we charge for interest. And one of the things that we've observed over the last since Trump's been back in office has been the trying to manage inflation and trying to bring that into a scope that most people feel can be at least tolerated, but their target is generally 2%. Well, I mean, clearly we're not doing well on that front, and in order to help try to bring that inflation down, the only way to really do that is to increase interest rates. Well, when you increase the interest rates, that also tends to increase the unemployment. So it's this counterintuitive balance that they're trying to manage, and it just he's getting a ton of pressure from the president and a lot of other things on interest rates because it's impacting the economy. So, I mean, we could go anywhere from there, right? But Luke, I'd like to hear your take on it too, because I mean, you're familiar with it. You understand that there's these two things that tend to compete against one another. What are your thoughts?
I want to interject real quick because you mentioned something in there, and most Americans, I don't know if they realize this or what it really means, but you say in there that there's that 2% that 2% inflation that they want. And when I hear that, to me, what I hear is they want to manage how much of my money they steal at 2%. Like 2% of my wealth is their goal to take every year. We don't want to take any less because, we need to take it. But we don't necessarily want to take more, or at least don't want you to see us taking more in the numbers.
Well, I mean, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the numbers fluctuating all the time. But go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, last episode, we kind of talked about monetary inflation versus the reported increase of prices and some of those things. So definitely go back to episode 3 of this podcast if you want a more complete breakdown of that. But, it is kind of a slap in the face, right? For the person living in the United States, the U.S. citizen who has to exist under the monetary regime that we do, for them to say with a straight face, to you over and over and over again. Oh yeah, it's just 2%. It's just the 2% inflation target. Okay. And the expectation is that you don't know what that means and you don't understand all the complicated mechanics behind that. And we have these wise stewards of the economy that are nonpartisan and detached from all the happenings in the world. And they're the ones that are going to wisely choose the right interest rate so that we can,
Well, they're not part of the government, right?
well, right. I mean, that is what we are told. Okay. And technically speaking, they are a private entity. The Federal Reserve is a private entity. But are they? I mean, tell me how many other companies that are private companies have their chairman appointed by the president of the United States. Isn't that a little weird? I mean, I don't know. Does Coca-Cola Corporation get appointed? I mean, the board, of Coca-Cola, does it get appointed by the president or approved by Congress or anything like that? No.
No, they all have to pay for their lobbyist seats.
That's right. Because they don't have to. They don't get to control the money.
Well, Intel might get theirs soon, but that's a different topic.
Yeah, that's a whole episode. But no, I mean, my initial take on this is just the complete folly. It always goes back to that Milton Friedman quote. The curious task of economics is to educate men on how little they understand about what they imagine they can design, right? And so we all pretend that we have these magical people that have more knowledge than you or I, lowly plebs, and they just know how to fix the economy. They work on it like it's some kind of a mechanical thing, and you just have to fine tune and play with it, and it's going to make everything great. And it doesn't, and everybody knows that inflation is higher than what's reported. You go try to buy meat, beef especially, at the grocery store. It's not 2% inflation. Okay? Once upon a time, my wife and I wouldn't buy like ground beef unless it was under $1 a pound, Good luck finding that,
Yeah,
So
you can't touch that anymore.
Well, so we say this, and I'm amused in that since the beginning, Trump has he's talked a big game about economics, but the delivery and to my mind, what we should to those who aren't aware, we've had artificially low interest rates for since the 90s, essentially the 90s up through basically COVID.
I have the numbers if we want to get into it, Nick. So I pulled all that.
If not the 90s, definitely since the 2000s. We've had basically 0% interest rate, which what do we call that where we come from? We call it easy money. We call it cheap money. We call it money that you're not paying for. And the idea is it means it keeps your economy moving because, you can spend money you don't have easily and give away money you don't have easily. So since the Fed is involved in interest rates and how quickly that money does move, you ideally want to slow things down and keep that money from moving around too quickly and going places where it's going to be malinvested, is what we'd say. So I opened this up talking about how embattled the legacy of Powell is going to be because, one thing Powell actually has been pretty good on is we actually do have a base rate right now that's not zero. And and despite all of the pressures from, say, Trump to make it look pretty, make the economy go up, make it go boom, he has fought pretty hard to creep it up without completely destroying things. And, I mean, despite what we look around, it looks like it could be a lot worse to me than what we've actually had. But how do you think yourselves Powell has done at the job, given their stupid mandate and trying to control what it controls?
I mean, I can jump in first, I guess. If you think about his mandate, right, I would say he really hasn't done that bad of a job. Kind of like what you alluded to, Nick, in that he's he's been able to increase rates without dramatically impacting the economy, which isn't that bad of a thing, all said and done. That I think the challenge that we're seeing, and I think a lot where Trump's really been big on him, is that that rate is still far past what they consider neutral, and that neutral target is like 3% for interest rates, and they're 4.5, give or take, somewhere in there. So that being said, I think that's where a lot of the pressure from the executive branch is coming from. But when we think about the overall job in terms of objective speak, from the average person's perspective, I mean, the Fed's arguably failed right from if you look at the data from when they were implemented to today, they have utterly failed in their objective. They've not protected the currency. They've not kept inflation in check. I mean, it's horrible. But
well, as you're telling me this, you're saying 3%. Okay, so their goal is 3%. There we go. That, but they had it at 2 decades at 0%. So, like, if it's supposed to be 3%, like, you don't feel like you got to swing the other way. And when you say 3% is considered like normal, Luke, I'm not sure if you have the numbers in front of you, but like from the 70s all the way through the 90s, is that even remotely what we would classify as even average for those years?
Well, no, I mean, no, gosh, it's so silly because, and so I'll read from the article, the Reuters article that we have here. So it says Powell, in his 2022 speech, channeled the late Fed chair Paul Volcker in pledging to stamp out inflation, whatever the cost to jobs and growth. And so, we're talking about how he's channeling Paul Volcker. Okay. That is such a silly thing to say. I mean, it's just a completely ridiculous thing to say. If you look at the years that Volcker was the Fed chair, which is 79 through 86, then 79, the interest rate, the federal funds rate, which other rates are kind of based on, 11.2%, right? The next year, 13.35%. It went all the way up to basically 20%, I believe, in 81. In 81, I guess the rate on this table that I have is 16.38%, but there was a brief spike at one point in that year where it was at like 19.1% or something like that. And so
I was going to say, I knew it hit at least 17.
Right. And so, like, okay, you go to get a mortgage, your mortgage isn't the Fed funds rate. Your mortgage is, 21% or whatever. And so that was the cost of financing. And you look at a mortgage amortization calculator or something like that right now at like a 6.5% mortgage, you're like, wow, I have to pay a lot of money to the bank, right? Okay, but that's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. If that was the mortgage rate, imagine what a credit card rate would be, that kind of stuff. And so what is the cost of buying something with money you don't have? That's what the question is, right? What is the rate that the general population, what an interest rate is supposed to be, is a reflection of the general attitude of the population. Are they more in favor of saving money? Are they feeling more risk averse? Or are they feeling more, let's say, elated? They want to go out and is it a growth mindset? It's okay, we'll finance it, that kind of thing. And so the savings rate, those kind of numbers, that's what's scary. The number of credit card delinquencies, that's what's scary when you talk about stuff like this. And that, to me, gives a much more clear indicator of where the economy's at than, did we hit 3% inflation according to CPI, which is a manipulated statistic, and they'll change the definition if it doesn't work out in their favor, right? Like, it's just, there's that whole thing about how the Soviet Union, you have all these numbers, like every academic during like the USSR, right? Every academic was like, oh my gosh, Russia has the most amazing economic figures. Their GDP is crazy. It's so amazing. They just couldn't stop gushing over the economic miracle of the USSR. Well, it's really easy to have insanely awesome numbers if you make up all the statistics, if you make up everything, if you practically abolished prices and you're just saying, well, yeah, it's great because we say it's great, right? And so that's the kind of era that I worry that we are entering into in the United States sometimes is, does any of this even mean anything? Can we revise the definitions enough times to where it just isn't meaningful anymore?
Well, that post-truth era that we've been told so much about.
Right, exactly. And so, Volcker, to kind of cap that point off, he did bring interest rates back down, but the lowest that it was when he was chair of the Fed was 6.29% for the federal funds rate. And to your point, 2009, Ben Bernanke, the federal funds rate was 0.16, right? It went down to 0.09 under Janet Yellen, like stuff like that. And so that is not, it's hilarious. It's basically zero. It's basically free to pay for something over time, which is an inversion of basic economic law,
It reminds me a lot of MMTers. Now, I don't know how much you've actually read on MMT and how much you understand the theory. And the thing that it reminds me of is that, like, if you take them at their word and what they actually recommend at like the policy level, it's probably not the most insane theory. It does deal with some practicalities. The problem is that, like, there's the movement both ways, and they never want to follow their policy when it tells that, like, when you're in the good times, they just want to keep treating it like it's bad times. Like, and it seems like the Fed operates at the same way. It's like, well, we want to do what's, good for us in good times, and then still what's good for, what's that same policy when it's not good for us. Like, you can't, I come from the Austrian school of economics, and so much that it's following incentives, and they kind of ignore the incentives when it's convenient for them. Is how it seems to work out in both of these situations. It's like it's all well and good to say you're going to do this when shit's bad, but then you don't. You just continue using the same policy that you would have when it was good.
I don't want to get into a takedown of MMT or anything like that. That's I think beyond the scope today, but it might be fun to do at some point. But yes, you're absolutely right on that. And we're just living under a lot of broken ideas, failed policy ideas, failed concepts that it sounds good in theory. And then when it doesn't work out, you just go, well, it sounded good in theory, and you just keep doing it, And so it's a real rough spot to be in. But Rob, we talked before we went on air a little bit about the jobs numbers and kind of how that plays into this a little bit more. What do you think? I guess my question is, what do you think is going to happen? Because I sometimes feel like you know a lot more than me on topics like this. So what do you think is happening with jobs, and where do you think we might go from here?
It's interesting, right? There's a couple of things that I read leading up to this as well that seem to indicate a lot of the sort of smart money on Wall Street is anticipating that we're going to kind of flatline and or have somewhat of a decline yet this year. And that's where a lot of the smart money seems to be heading, because you see, and I use smart money loosely, but I do see that a lot of them are moving in a more conservative fashion with where they're moving funds, how they're sort of planning for a potential downturn. So I do see that as a possible direction, meaning that the chances of unemployment to go higher are probably there, especially because when you think about the broader scale economic impacts of tariffs, and this is obviously a direction that the president's decided to move in, without having the full support of Congress to, at the same time, unload the tax burden from the people, you're going to have an increase in pricing, plain and simple. Like, and inflation will go up. If we think back to when tariffs worked prior to the implementation of the income tax, the tariffs worked fine to a degree. And some would argue against that. That's fair. We're not going to get into that discussion today, but that is the general way on how our country made money to support the government. We had roads, we had hospitals, we had all this stuff. We had a military all prior to the income tax. The problem is now we're adding income tax and tariffs at the same time. That's not a good recipe for success. And you can kick that can down the road all you want, but if you actually are increasing those tariffs and they're actually going to go into play without doing something on the taxation side, it's going to cause a problem for the average person, the you and me level, right? And so I see that as, not only does that impact us because the consumer pays for everything, that means it's going to impact business, it's going to impact corporations. So we're going to see those knock-on effects as a result of those things, with that stuff going into play, unless something major is done. And on top of it, we're still going to have our currency deflating in value every year. And because there's nothing being done to correct that either. So I'm not trying to be all dire, because that's not the point of our podcast, right? It's to provide people hope. Well, we have options that help with that, right? That's a lot of what we do here. But when we look at the overall outlook, regardless of where somebody falls on the political spectrum, it does not look the best for us unless somebody's willing to commit to major changes. And that someone needs to either be Congress, it needs to be the Fed, needs to be the president, or all of them together. But somebody has to step up and wear the pants and get the job done, because otherwise it's not going to happen.
What are you thinking, Thomas Massie, next president? Putting you on the spot.
I mean, that would be a step in the right direction, I guess, but doesn't mean they would fix it.
Right.
Without getting too political, like the fantasy that Thomas Massie would ever get anywhere near the presidency.
Not gonna do it. Yeah.
But to pull us back into the more realistic realm, as Rob said, it looks pretty dire. I would argue that, it looks pretty dire until you look at the state of every other nation's economy right now. And then our economy looks a whole lot better. Sure, it may be like the kid with a broken arm, but like when the other countries all got 2 broken legs, it's pretty good spot to be in. And the bigger issues that I see, it's not like, what is the inflation and the way that we prop things up and utilize it, is that it causes malformation. That's the word that we use all the time. And what it means is, yes, it basically means money's going to stupid things as opposed to the intelligent things that you would like. So we're probably not going to invent faster than light travel anytime soon. But someone's going to be getting that money and doing something with it that may be marginally useful. So there's going to be some jobs that never go away because people are always going to have needs. So it's like, to me, things can only look so bad. I think most of the jobs talk always boils down to fear mongering, because there's always I always tell people, as bad as you think the economy can get, you think AI is going to steal your job. Well, eventually, the only thing people are going to have is a need to fill time, and so you're going to get a job as somebody's cuddle buddy, or you're going to be designing roller coasters, because there's always going to be a need. Need does not go away because money and policy are screwed up. Certainly at the macro level.
No, Nick, I think you bring up I was going to say, I think you bring up a really interesting point, though, of what's the reference point. And if we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, you're right. Like, we are in a good position. Like, we look a lot better. I think when I speak about these terms, I look at it as what could it be and or should it be? And that's my reference point. And I don't like to bend from that, because you have to have a point of reference. Well, so that's where I'm coming from.
Well, in our mind's eye, we're seeing the Ferrari that the economy could be, but we're having to watch it be a jalopy. Maybe at this point it might even feel more like a horse-drawn carriage moving our economy along, but we know how good it could be. So since we're here, we're focused on positivity. What positive takeaways do you gentlemen have for us today?
Yeah, I'll go first here, Rob. I think that despite all of this, we still have some excellent tools at our disposal where we can build our own kind of what I'm going to call a banking system, not technically speaking a banking system, but I'm not going to go start my own Bank of America, but we can build our own place to warehouse and grow our wealth in a very, very tax favorable environment. And we can deploy that when opportunities present themselves. Because the thing about economic turmoil, jobs numbers fluctuating, the inflation rate fluctuating, all these things, the thing about uncertain times, I almost hate to say that after COVID, but the thing about uncertain times is there are always opportunities, right? When there's a buyer, there's also a seller and vice versa. And so all the time, if somebody is spooked by the jobs numbers and they want to get out of some business and they want to sell their stock or whatever, that means that you have a possibility to buy that. And the person who gets to buy that is the person who is well capitalized, who has saved and has money on the sidelines that's ready to go. They don't have to go ask the bank for a loan, right? They get to just get it. Hey, you know what? That looks great. I'd love to buy that storage unit facility from you for $600,000. I can close in 2 weeks or whatever. And so if you're in that position, deal's done. You're the winner. You're in a much better footing. Buy yourself some inflation, or recession-resistant investments. There are plenty of things you could diversify into other than just stocks, right? Because when people get spooked, the stock market might crash. But the stuff that we do, which is life insurance, the most profitable years that these life insurance companies have ever had, in a lot of cases, is 2008. Which is a horrible year. I mean, if you think, oh, what's the worst economic year that we've all lived through? It's 2008, right? Well, depends on what industry you're in. And so I always look at this as a cool thing. I've had a wonderful time with higher interest rates. It's been great for me. And a lot of people are they feel terrible about it. Oh, my mortgage is going to be more expensive when I move. Oh, my car payment's so expensive. All these things. Well, I'm not going to the bank to seek financing for things, so I get a little bit of a different set of playing rules, It makes me feel pretty good. And so I'll be a little sad if interest rates get cut, and I'm not hesitating to say that on camera. So, people can beat me up in the comments or whatever. But no, I feel great about that. Have felt great about it, and I always know that there's lots of opportunity on the horizon, so it just speaks to saving and being patient.
Yeah, I like what you said there, Luke, and it just brings me back to a big part of what we do is provide hope for people, in that what we do is provide that proper level of foundation. And we create, if we kind of go into and change our mindset about money, and we have a great environment, control the environment in which we put our money into, that is contractually guaranteed to go one way, and it's only going to build up the level of capital that we want to have in our lifetimes, that puts us in the position to be able to do exactly what you were talking about. It creates opportunities. Capital attracts opportunities, plain and simple. Many of the people that I listen to have said that many, many times, and you just see it happen. And that's a big part of what we do, is help people create this pool of capital that they can leverage, they can use to be able to go do all the stuff that they need to. Economic downturns, and as much as we don't like to see them, economic downturns create opportunities. Well, if you have the capital in those opportunity arenas, now you're able to scoop stuff up that is dramatically going to outpace inflation. It's dramatically going to outpace the market. We're in a position to see people succeed at levels that maybe they never thought possible. And that's one of the things that I love about what we do, is helping to put people into those positions by creating the right foundation for their money to be and grow, and then allow them to live their life in a way that maybe was never thought possible by them or previous generations. So it's a great thing that we do there.
So you're both seeing a downturn less as a downturn and more as a point of arbitrage.
It could be.
Absolutely.
Right on. Well, we are at that point, gentlemen. So Luke, why don't you take us out? And
Yeah, you bet. So, again, as always, thanks so much for joining us for the Between the Lies podcast. This week's episode has been a lot of fun. If you watch this full episode, you are clearly interested in the future of money. So, we've got a free toolkit that you can use to help demystify the future of your money. Head on over to perfectspiralcapital.com/podcast. And you will click the link there, get free access to a wonderful toolkit with lots of cool stuff. Download that today. Let us know what you think. We'll see you on the next episode.